everybody, I'm Dennis Daly. I spent 20 years with United Press International, most of it with the old UPI Radio Network. And my favorite assignment was going on the road producing and hosting American Montage. It was an hour-long weekly program. Now here's an edited version of one of those shows. Hi, everybody. We are standing on Post Street in downtown San Francisco. And it is a beautiful day, as it is this time of year in San Francisco. 150 Post is the address, and this is what you might call the flagship store of the Williams-Sonoma company. You've probably seen the catalogs and some of the prettiest cookbooks I've ever seen in my life. The man whose name is on the awning here, Chuck Williams, joins us. Last year, we met up with him at the Fancy Foods and Confectioner Convention. I had to learn how to say that in New York City, and we talked about a variety of things. Chuck, thanks for coming down here to talk to us. This is the first of your stores, I hate to say that, I've had the time to go to. It's absolutely lovely, and you tell me this is, as far as inventory goes, the largest of the stores you have.
It's the largest store. It's very nice to have you here.
Well, good to see you again. Let's go inside, and if you can, take us on a little bit of a walking tour and highlight, if you will, the kinds of I hate to call them pots and pans, they're too pretty to be called that, the kinds of things people are buying for their kitchen that you sometimes need to go to a big city or come to a specialty store to find. You certainly have one of everything here.
Well, one thing that we have in this store and some of the smaller stores we don't have the largest assortment is the copper. And it's French copper that we've had for 35 years. It's the same copper. And it's this company that makes all the French copper for restaurants around the world.
Is it safe to say that copper is the favorite because it just heats the best?
Well, I wouldn't call it...
It's pretty, I mean, but in some cases, you know, no one comes into your kitchen if it's a restaurant.
Well, I can't say it's a favorite. I mean, years ago it was. 100 years ago, it was a thing that they cooked in because it conducts heat better than any other metal. But that's basically what copper does. It conducts heat very rapidly and throughout the pot, and it cooks very well.
Now, you go into a lot of people's houses, and their copper pots are very tarnished. Is it because they don't know how to cook with them? They don't know how to clean with them? I mean, my copper pots would only look that pretty the first day, I think.
Well, even just hanging up in the kitchen, they'll tarnish. I mean, they don't have to be used to tarnish. It's just the air tarnishes them. Any chemicals in the air will tarnish it.
These are certainly beautiful. They have, cast iron handles?
Cast iron handles, and they have to be polished to be in the store. I mean, they're constantly being polished.
You must have a crew of people that do nothing but polish this and the silver.
But it's interesting that copper has become almost as inexpensive as some of the expensive cookware. It's just a little bit more. In fact, it's about the same as some of the cookware now, like all-clad.
Why is that? Just more in favor now, or?
No, it's just that the price of copper hasn't gone up that much. And the production of it is still in rural France, and so it hasn't become a competitive market. Let's take two of the items, if we can, here, and compare, for example, now this is stainless steel. There's a whole section of that. The price difference, say, between a common item between stainless steel and copper, it's not a huge difference now, is it? Can you compare two items? A saucepan is $93 with a cover in all-clad.
Oh, that's pretty.
This one's $135, but that's a more expensive one.
So we're really getting, as you say, rather close on price. I would have thought
$110.
I would have thought the price would have been much.
And that is very heavy.
Yes,
it's very heavy.
Would have thought the price would have been more different than that. You know, one of the
fact it's even, well, it's 3/4 $105, and with a brass handle.
After you came to the West Coast, after being in Europe and in France, if I remember the story, that you really realized that there were just not a lot of places on this side of the Atlantic where if you wanted to get into fine cooking, you could really find the utensils for it.
That's true. There wasn't much in this country, especially after the war. There were a number of manufacturers that manufactured cooking equipment or baking equipment in this country that went into war work during the war and they never returned. So even what was made here sort of disappeared.
I think a lot of young people who are not old enough to remember either the Second World War or its history do not realize that every company in this nation stopped doing what it was doing and started making guns or bombs or trucks or something to support the war effort.
That's true. I mean, America became very much behind the war effort, both in manufacturing and manpower. I took a trip to Europe in 1952. I was building houses for the 10 years previous, and I was fascinated with the bakeware and cookware in Paris. And when I came back, I bought an old building that had a hardware store in it and converted it into small shops, and I made one shop I started a little kitchenware shop, and it became a French kitchenware shop.
And then, if I'm not mistaken, you started publishing what at the time was just a primitive basic newsletter.
Yes, I did a newsletter, and occasionally we did a little catalog of our own. And 15 years later, we started the catalog as it is today, and commercial catalog. And since then, we've expanded. And
how many stores now?
There's about 125 of them now around the country.
Now, I would think, though, in a way, the San Francisco Bay Area would have been an advantageous place to start for a couple of reasons. You have some very upscale people here. Marin County, pretty high income there. Not that it takes a lot of money, but the kinds of people I would think who have the fine dinners and maybe even have a French cook, you'd find more here than, say, in Topeka.
Yes, because we're talking about the middle 50s. And I would say that most people, middle class and above, were apt to have someone working in the house. And they did have cooks. And some of the more affluent people had French cooks. And they knew French cooking, but the equipment wasn't available here for it.
I think you told me also that a wonderful woman, still active, semi-retired, who suddenly appeared on public television, had a great bearing in popularizing French cooking. Of course, if we're talking about Julia Child.
Yes, Julia Child came along in 1961, in fact, with the first book, The Art of French Cooking. And then she was on television for a number of years with the cooking classes, and that's what started French cooking in this country. French cooking wasn't really known in this country. Very few people knew anything about it.
Well, now, your store is a combination of some wonderful long-term items. You were talking about how many hundreds of years back copper kettles go, but here we have something very modern in plastic, not the old-fashioned wooden one. It's an ice cream maker.
Ice cream maker, and there's been a number of things that have changed the way people cook in this country. The food processor, quite a few electric appliances, mainly the food processor.
Hasn't you would credit what I guess one of the earliest ones, and they're still available here under the brand name Cuisinart, really opened up a whole new thing for chefs, particularly in the area of food. And I would take it, not to put words in your mouth, but to get something as finely ground or chopped as some of these food processors do now was not only nearly impossible, but would have taken much more time.
Oh, it'd take much more time. I mean, they did a great deal to change the way people cook in this country. They may have not had one themselves right at the beginning, but in fact, there's a lot of people that really don't have one today, but they have changed the way people cook because new things have been developed from them.
Chuck, what about seasonings? I know at the food convention where I met you in New York City, I was amazed that there was an entire display area, and we're talking about hundreds of square feet just devoted to mustard up there, and one just on olive oils and flavorings. That would seem to be a growing industry in itself right now.
Oh, yes. I think that's one of the main things has changed the way people cook is the seasonings. It's making simple food much more palatable. Simple little things that like salads, pasta sauces, Chinese, Asian food, Oriental type cooking. It's all of the thing of taking just simple vegetables, a little bit of chicken, and having seasonings in it that change the taste of it completely and make it much more interesting.
Well, Chuck Williams, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You have a wonderful store. It is somewhat like the Smithsonian in Washington. I tell people, don't just go once. Keep going back. You see something every time you go there. And maybe in another year we'll meet at some other convention, or I can come out and see what kind of new product you have.
Good. Very nice to have you here. Nice
Thanks.
to see you again.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you.
And there you have it, another edited episode of one of the American Montage programs prepared for the UPI Radio Network back in the 1980s and 90s. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks for listening. Thanks for going with me this week. And check YouTube for more American Montage programs.